Star Trek, the ultimate franchise. These are the voyages of 3 veteran Trekkies, Rich, Ian, and Toby. Their ongoing mission? To explore the vast Star Trek universe, to seek out new perspectives and fresh debates, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. Beyond the Final Frontier.
Hello and welcome to Beyond the Final Frontier, a Star Trek podcast with me, your host, Rich Matthews, and my fellow big idea men, Mr. Ian Spelling.
Hey there, everybody.
And Mr. Toby Weidman.
Just big. But hello.
Yeah, so thank you for acknowledging the listeners. So today's episode is one of the themes which has been slightly more contentious between us all about what this actually means and how we would quantify it. So there might be some variety of interpretation of this. But essentially, the original pitch was big ideas in Star Trek.
I don't mind admitting I've been the one that's had the biggest problem understanding what this concept means. I do wonder whether that is my education, in terms of I've never studied film theory. It sounds like a very film theory type subject. I studied media studies, specifically print journalism, so I was studying things like how to write headlines and work into style guides and touch typing and shorthand and things like that. I wasn't studying how to break down films and TV shows, because the biggest thing is that when Rich was explaining it to me, what I was hearing was, so you mean a theme? What's the theme of an episode? I mean, maybe you should try and explain your interpretation of it, Rich.
So all it is interestingly though, well, my original degree was in psychology, and then I did film studies later for my master's.
The jokes write themselves, folks.
Indeed. For me, it's a quintessential thing that separates Star Trek from a lot of its peers or imitators or successors, which is to say it, like Arthur C. Clarke, like Isaac Asimov, like Ray Bradbury, like Philip K. Dick, it uses science fiction as a vessel for contemplations of existence, the nature of humanity, the universe, and at its best, for me, Star Trek manages to do that while being a supreme entertainment. And so it's whether it's allegory, whether it's one of those kind of things. So any of the Star Trek I really love and hold very close to my heart has this to some degree in it. Not all of it. Sometimes good character, good concept, good scenario is totally enough and well done. And I think that's probably where there seemed to be some failure of me to communicate that initially when I pitched this as a theme. Because a lot of what was being suggested by my colleagues, by Toby in particular, was I would be like, well, that's more sort of dramatological concept rather than a big idea, a sort of lofty notion, philosophical notion is probably the closest. And yes, it does. The more I say it, sound wanky and pretentious.
So, for example, when I was thinking of big ideas, the big idea to me is that Deep Space Nine is set on a space station. So it's not going out and exploring the universe and strange new worlds. It's on a fixed setting. So that for me is how I interpreted that originally.
I went philosophical.
That's format, Tobes, is what I believe I said. And it's a good format. It's a good idea, a good production idea, good storytelling idea, but it's not quite. Ian, I think, did interpret it how I intended it, but that it's philosophical. It's where the storytelling, a device, a theme, an episode, whatever it is, a movie, hinges on something that is deeply philosophical.
So all I'm saying is I'm prefacing this by saying that if my list doesn't fit the theme of the episode, if I pick stuff that doesn't match, it's because I've not fully understood what you've meant.
That's fine. It'll create some good conversation.
But how I've interpreted it is...
Which would be interesting.
It's a theme beyond the surface theme. That's the only way that I could really understand it.
It's a theme beyond the final frontier. Yeah. So my number 7 big idea is the chase. from Star Trek: The Next Generation. Actually, looking into this time, I learned a new word, which is always good. The big idea in The Chase is that every humanoid species is based on the same DNA that was spread by a particular 4 billion-year-old race or something like that. Humans, Vulcans, Romulans, one origin, one ancient hand, and it was discovered in the episode through a message, a sort of treasure hunt, which led to a final message which says it's not a weapon, it's a plea for peace amongst the children of these architects. And that was a big idea for me, for the idea that every form of life in the Alpha Quadrant was actually related, and so that we're actually more similar than we are different. A lovely Star Trek big idea. And also just the reality that it addressed one of the criticisms of Star Trek, that why is everyone carbon-based life form sort of thing? The word I learned was panspermia.
Lots of different kinds of sperm.
Yeah, literally that, which is the hypothesis that life exists throughout the universe, distributed by space dust, meteoroids.
Also known as space seed.
Yeah, exactly. Which is was being more popularized by Prometheus.
We don't talk about that film, Rich. Sorry.
No, we don't. We don't. I know. I'm not saying that I'm not going to besmirch the franchise it besmirched by invoking that by name now, but that film.
We don't talk about Prometheus, Rich.
Okay, sorry.
The second rule.
Okay, Toby, let's talk you down. It's all good.
Never has a film had one of my all-time favorite trailers ever, and then been so disappointed by the final
Well, I
film.
know it's not like you didn't have any precedent set by Blade Runner. Anyway,
Blade Runner trailer's not great.
Oh.
It's fine. The one they did for the re-release with the directors for the final cut was much better.
So was the film.
Well, we might get into that later.
Yeah, anyway, so The Chase predated Prometheus by 30-odd years. That's my number 7. Ian.
I went with bigger themes. I have not specific episodes. My number 7 is exploration. At its core, Star Trek believes our basic instinct is curiosity, and curiosity is what sends us out into space to explore. It's more or less what sets Star Trek in motion, is that human interest in exploring what's out there, what we don't understand. Not blowing shit up because we don't understand it is a big part of our take on exploration within Star Trek. It's treated almost spiritually by a number of the characters, notably, I would say, probably Picard and Kirk the most. Kirk pushes the boundaries. Picard tries to understand them. Janeway wants just to survive them. Star Trek is the one that finds the positivity in most of its exploration. Of course, there are dark things going on in the Star Trek worlds as well. But, you've got Veacher out there trying to figure out existence and more or less puts us in touch with God. As bad as Star Trek V is, just the concept of even going there, who or what is God, is interesting to me. If you said to me what examples, like you specifically used The Chase, I would go with Star Trek the Motion Picture. Oddly enough, not my favorite thing in the world, but that was a real science fiction exploration story. Far Beyond the Stars fits in there, and Corbinite Maneuver is absolutely in there. And let's start all of this with the opening narration. Seek out new life and new civilizations.
Agreed. Good one.
Right. Trepidation.
Yeah.
So I also have gone with themes rather than specifics. I've given each one a title, and it's the Fountain of Youth and the desire for immortality.
Good choice, Toby.
It has been depicted in multiple episodes and films. The Dowd from TNG Survivors. There's the Guardian from City on the Edge of Forever. There's the Q, obviously. The Prophets. EMH Data. I mean, there's Lanthanites. There's lots that you can choose from. I've specifically gone for Star Trek Insurrection, the long life that is provided by the briar patch and its metaphasic radiation.
Nothing says youth like a Klingon pimple.
Or firmer boobs. The idea of immortality is a fascinating subject for me because it's not something that I've ever desired. I would like to experience multiple different ages. I find that idea very appealing, particularly with invention and evolution. But the idea of having to live through that is not appealing. I'd like to visit it maybe in a time travel sense, to go back and see things. But if I was having to live through it, like Highlander, say, or Interview with the Vampire is another example.
It shows the fatigue of entropy, even if you...
Yeah, I think I'd just get bored. I think I'd be like the Q in Voyager's Death Wish. I think it would be more like a curse than a blessing.
Interesting. What
is alluring is the healing factor of the metaphasic radiation. We're all of a certain age and our bodies are becoming more and more decrepit. So to have something that treats your physical and mental ailments, that would be fantastic. Insurrection encourages reflection on the nature of progress and the importance of respecting indigenous cultures. And I think these are enduring core values that has featured in Star Trek quite a lot. The thing that's really interesting is that difference between the Baku and the Sonar, and that one chooses a pastoral life, and then the other is, no, we want to go out and explore. But then when they are robbed of the very thing that gives them the opportunity to explore more, they want it back. And I think that's a very interesting concept. Big idea, not concept, big idea.
No, exactly. No, but it did. No, a big idea is a concept. So after all your nerves, I think that nailed it, frankly.
Well, this is only the first one of 7, so we'll see.
Yeah. And I'm gonna switch the way I frame it, and I think I can then marry up with what you're both doing slightly more. So my number 6 is the nature of communication, with its particular hook in this case being Darmok as an explicit examination of language in all its forms, and how even a society is sophisticated enough to have, as Starfleet and Federation and most of the races in the Alpha Quadrant, to have a universal translator that overcomes the biggest barrier for any peoples to interact. Even that has limits, and they have limits. That reveals how vital clear communication is. And as an allegorical terms, how most of today's problems stem from poor communication or lack of communication or opaque communication or deceit, whereas there's lack of truth within the communication. And I think that Star Trek's very good at exploring that in multiple places, whether that is through just the clashes between Klingons and Vulcans and Romulans and everybody else. But in Darmok in particular, that is distilled with the language as metaphor, as language as pure allegory, as an expression, a contextualization of what you think and feel, and how your language actually molds how you think much more than we are conscious of anymore. I think that is a very powerful big idea, and Darmok in particular is a beautiful crystallization.
My number 6 is what I would call the cost of war, the price of battle. The Dominion War, Deep Space Nine, really is the one that crystallized that for me. People die. People get maimed. Nog, look what happens to him. He literally loses a piece of himself, regains it, but he's not quite the same. He's different. We're not looking at exploration and diplomacy here. We're looking at PTSD. You're looking at death. You are looking at occupation. You are looking, as we were talking in our previous episode, about moral compromise and the breaking of that moral compromise. These are Starfleet officers who are lying to others and lying to themselves and to each other. You know, you've got Garrick in there kind of committing atrocities.
You got terrorism through the Maquis.
And remember here, sometimes duplicity works. That's the scary part. As much as I love the overall peace, love, kumbaya element of Star Trek, Deep Space Nine is my favorite show because it goes there. What is the cost of all of this? How do these things happen? What happened behind the scenes? Until the Section 31 movie came along and ruined the concept of Section 31. Section 31 was this cool thing lurking in the background. The fact that it was never fully developed was always, it wasn't a giant MacGuffin for me, but it worked because you knew there was like shadow play going on in the background. Isn't there actually an episode of Deep Space Nine called Shadow Play?
I think there is, yeah.
representative episodes would be, let's say, in the Pale Moonlight, Siege of AR-558, and Star Trek VI is a perfect example.
Yes, absolutely.
We joke all the time about Blade Runner, and I will give Blade Runner this, and here's a real Deep Space Nine Blade Runner comparison. This is where they both ask survival versus morality, and where do you draw the line? I'm not a giant fan of Blade Runner, but the philosophical argument that it does make is interesting to me, and it's very comparable to this concept, the war concept within Deep Space Nine. It's easy to be a saint in paradise is one of the best lines of dialogue in Star Trek, and it gets overlooked.
My number 6 is, I've titled it Asking the Big Qs. It is certainly related to my previous pick, but it's not exactly the same. I'm talking about the Q continuum. But it's not about longevity. It's this concept of omnipotence that intrigues me, as represented by the Q. And if you had the kind of godlike powers that the Q seemingly possess, they can do anything, what would you do with it? And so there are 2 episodes that I think explore this concept. One we all love, which is Deja Q, and the other one from Next Gen as well, which is True Q, where you have Amanda Rogers, who doesn't know she's a Q and slowly discovers it. Yeah, that's not a particular favorite episode, but I think what they do is they explore this subject very well. The first explores how a god would react if they have all their powers stripped away, and what that means to them as a person. And then the second examines what you do if you suddenly discovered you had the power to do anything, and would you abuse it? And I think they're both very interesting explorations of the god complex. Would you become self-centered or narcissistic, or would you be selfless, compassionate? And what would be the repercussions of your actions? Maybe you would do something that you think would be helping, but it might have an impact on something else. So that's the thing that I find kind of interesting. I guess it's the, if you were immortal and could do anything, what would you do with it?
So my number 5 actually comes off the back of your number 6, Toby, quite well, which is it's about what is the nature of God. Specifically, my example, the Q continuum would be an honorable mention for me. It's actually the prophets from Deep Space Nine.
Interdimensional aliens, you mean?
Interdimensional aliens that live non-linear, interdimensional aliens that live outside of our notions of time and therefore appear to be gods. So a good example of what I mean is, by the time you get to the dawn of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the whole couching of Thor and the Asgardians and the way they thought to make that palatable to a mass audience was to say that science, advanced enough science, looks like magic or religion. This, though, takes it that one step further. The prophets and the Q, but the prophets in particular, because it's simply the nature of their existence rather than how advanced they are. We don't know if they advanced to that point. We don't know if they were ever linear. But for all intents and purposes, the idea of a species that gives off a wisdom simply because it can perceive all time at once, and therefore answer the very questions which elude us as linear beings. That's a very deep notion, I think. Marry that with the moral, ethical facets which you just talked about, Ian, in terms of the war and things. And so people say, oh, it's the least Star Trek because it's darker, but it's the most Star Trek in terms of its central conceit. How do you deal with something with an entity that is non-linear and beyond us? And is that not the ultimate new life and new civilization?
Well, you get answers to questions that you don't understand.
Yeah.
Just the whole setup of Deep Space Nine. Every question they ask, they never understand the answer.
Right. Or sometimes it's questions for the answers. That's the other way to look at it.
Or answers to things you haven't even thought to ask. It's incredibly interesting. And they didn't overplay it either, because it could have been deeply esoteric and marginalizing and alienating, but they're very, very good at using the prophets well, I think. Less so once we got into the Power of Wraith a bit. It got a little bit more a B-movie, maybe.
But it's almost like if you've got gods, you have to have devils.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's the yin-yang. You've got to have the balance.
It does. No, it makes sense, but it's a little bit more literal than the initial concept. So, I mean, the best thing, to some degree, that Deep Space Nine asked anyone is, to the Bajoran, the prophets, they're gods, to Starfleet, they're interdimensional, non-linear aliens. The show asks, can they be both? That's the big idea of Deep Space Nine for me.
All right. My number 5 is, let's see if we can guess this. I'm going to say Measure of a Man, Author, and any data episodes of Picard.
I think Therefore I Am.
Humanity versus AI. Yeah. AI is all the rage right now. It's changing our universe as we speak in real time. Star Trek was really exploring that with the Doctor, and before that with Data.
And before that with Blade Runner.
With Blade Runner and Roy Batty. Absolutely. I have that down here, boys. They're approaching the same existential issue, taking it very different ways, right? Batty just wants to live, survive. Data wants to understand life more. Data ultimately cares, and Batty does not. One is hyper-violent, the other one adopts a cat. I mean, just look at the differences between those two.
But that's the nature of upbringing. So Data is brought up to be curious about what's going on, whereas Roy and the rest of the replicants have been brought up to fight.
And or serve.
Absolutely. Don't disagree with you at all. But it tells you that Data wasn't just a robot. The Doctor was not just a hologram. You know, they tell jokes, they cry, they, like I said, adopt a cat. They want to understand why, what, and how about the world at large and themselves and everything and everyone they encounter. What's also cool is, think about this. How often does Star Trek side with the machines?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. That's true. They give them the benefit of the doubt most often.
Picard, they don't. Season 1 of Picard.
That's the whole premise of Picard, but there's still Data to prove them wrong, ultimately.
And Soji.
Oh, yeah. How about a shout out to our girl? She's killing it on the pit, right? Issa Bronis?
So my 5th spot is, I've titled this Infinite Diversity and Infinite Combinations. Specifically, I guess I'm talking about the eugenics debate here.
Okay.
And, there's lots of options that you can throw: Space Seed, Wrath of Khan, Enterprises, Triple Bill of Borderland, Coal Station 12, and the Augments. I guess it's the discussion between what are the benefits to humanity versus the dangers. A good example is Strange New Worlds, Ad Astra per Aspera. I mean, you could see it as an allegory to explore the persecution of people who are different, whether that's gender, ethnicity, sexual preference, whatever. If someone is different to, and I'm going to put this in bunny ears, the norm, does that mean that they don't deserve the same rights as everyone else? I think this says here that it's those very differences that are essential to society, whether it's expression, growth, development. Most of the time, the eugenics, specifically how Khan has been portrayed, it's seen as a danger. And here it takes the other route, and that it's actually a positive force for multiculturalism, diversity, and I think that's at the heart of Star Trek as represented by the idea.
Good one. See, I had nothing to worry about. Although I do like the fact that, because you alluded to your education, well, not alluded, you talked about your education earlier, and how you've turned that to your method, which is you've come up with you've got a headline.
Yeah, I know. So this is the practical way that I approach stuff. I have to think of the headline and then I can build the concept.
Yeah, there you go. It worked. It worked perfectly. So my number 4 is essentially the nature of memory, and are we only defined by our memories?
This is really interesting, Rich, because my next one's about memory.
Okay, we'll see then what the example is. So my primary example is the inner light. Lifetime in 25 minutes. Probe strikes the Enterprise. In 25 real minutes, Picard lives 40 years of another man's life, put through his own experiences if he's living it for real. He falls in love, raises children, has a family, learns to play the flute, sees his world and civilization end, and then wakes up with memories, 40 years worth of memories, and that he's then supposed to just revert back to his life on the Enterprise. And the idea behind the probe was this probe was sent out like a time capsule, but literally that their civilization would continue as we all in theory do, is if we're not, to quote Star Trek 2, he's not really dead as long as we remember him. And that's the principle they've gone for. And this is addressed in different facets in other parts of Star Trek. V'ger as an entity being about the amount of data it's got, about information that eventually amasses enough information that it becomes more than it originally was intended. And would data cease being data if you wiped his memory? Anyone who's been unfortunate enough to experience or know someone who's experienced any form of dementia or anything like that, again, that it's sort of like that person is being stripped away. So is actually the nature of our existence, and therefore any stories we tell and anything we think about the universe and about existence, is it all predicated on memory? And The Inner Light is a really beautiful exploration of that, poetic, as close as TV can get to poetry.
I can't wait to get to my one, which is to do with memory.
My number 4 is time travel.
Ah, cool.
And the danger of changing history. Time travel has been used a lot in Star Trek. I've heard some people describe it to the point of cliche that it's been used in Star Trek, but it's a science fiction show, and we compare what's happening now by looking at what's happening in the future or the past. So I have no issue with the multiple times that the franchise has gone to that particular well. My favorite example of it is Star Trek 4, where we literally slingshot. You know the way people hate watch stuff? I hate watch that time travel sequence. To me, that was always like too trippy and groovy, and the heads and the spinning and that funky tunnel to melting, all of it. The heads of the characters is always what made me. I remember sniggling a little when I saw it the first time. A friend of mine joked that it was like Star Trek's version of a prog rock album. The bottom line is, history is breakable. And sometimes when you break something, you can't fix it. So you're talking about erasing timelines, you're talking about erasing people from existence, you are talking about letting or not letting a tragedy happen. So we're talking about some of the best of Star Trek in what I just mentioned there. City on the Edge of Forever, Tomorrow is Yesterday, one of my favorite episodes. I think we've discussed this in other episodes of our podcast. Just the whole concept that the pilot isn't important. Who's important? The pilot's son.
Yeah.
And that always struck me, even as a kid. I remember thinking, wow, that's a really cool point.
Yesterday's Enterprise does it as well, doesn't it?
Yesterday's Enterprise is the next one on my list, and obviously, like I said, Star Trek 4. But you get the importance of some of this, like He Knows, Doctor, He Knows. Arguably one of the most powerful lines in all of Star Trek in 60 years is that line. And that line carries weight because they went back in time and had to not change the timeline. So super, super, super important. And again, it just ties into the classic element of sci-fi storytelling. I mean, again, there's no better example of that in terms of the fun, the science, and environment, all of it with Star Trek 4, with the whales of all things. You turn on that movie, you are in 1986. You just know it. Even the dedication to the Challenger crew puts you in 1986. But it's beautiful and it works. And the movie at this point is futuristic but an antique at the same time. Well, guess what? That's like Kirk's glasses. So that movie absolutely to this day still works for me on multiple levels. But just in terms of what I'm specifically talking about, time travel and the danger of changing history, that wraps all of it on the fun side. And then obviously you've got the darker side with things like City on the Edge.
My fourth spot I've titled The Needs of the Many Outweigh the Needs of the One, but it's probably not what you're thinking. It's taking the extreme version of that philosophy where resistance is futile, because I'm talking about the Borg. The Borg are this hive mind which has a utilitarian approach to life where being one mind is essential to their life. Individualism is extremely hazardous to their existence. So generally, utilitarianism means everyone working together for a greater good, normally at the sacrifice of the individual, and I think that's the Borg to a T. There are lots of examples of Borg episodes where we could look at this. where the individual rails against the collective, the fight for individualism. The obvious choice is Unimatrix 1 from Voyager, but you could also pick iBorg or Descent from Next Gen.
Mhm.
As an example, I've picked an episode that we haven't, as far as I can remember, really spoken about before, that explores what the separation from the collective actually means. It does it in a slightly different way, and it's Voyager's episode 1. The big idea here is the effect of social disconnection. So this episode reaffirms that we, as humans, are all social animals, and we're hardwired to need social connection and interaction. We all discovered this in a very personal way during lockdown. And I think, funnily enough, this episode taps into that very well. Essentially, we go a little stir crazy, and that's what happens to 7 of 9. We need our friends, we need our family, or at least most of us do. This is an admission from someone who is borderline misanthropic. I'm quite a solitary person. I like my own company. I'm comfortable being by myself, caring for myself. But I know that if I was the last person on Earth, I would not handle it well. Now, I wonder how long it would actually take me to go mad. And here, it takes 7 of 9 around about a month, because that's how long it takes them to get across the nebula. And I think it's a very good and often overlooked episode of Voyager, because there's been enough time for her to acclimatize to the Voyager crew and not be part of the collective. But when pushed to an extreme where she really is isolated, apart from the Doctor who's locked in sickbay, it's a really interesting exploration of what it means to be alone and be isolated, particularly when you are used to having, you're part of a bigger picture.
Interesting. It's funny because what you think about the pandemic is, so the example I always give is that if you'd asked me, do you always want to work from home? I think I would want it to, but I actually need to go out.
But the reality of...
Yes. And want versus need is an interesting distinction within that as well.
Mm-hmm. I am freelance, so I tend to work from home, but I do miss the office environment from when I did work in an office. So when I do get jobs where I'm required to go into an office and work with a group of people, I actually really enjoy it. But maybe that's because I have the freedom to work at home. And
that's really what you mean. You want the freedom of choice rather than...
And that's the Borg do not have freedom of choice.
Yes, that dovetails very nicely into my number 3, which is also the Borg.
Okay.
But my title was Liberty, Freedom, Free Will, and how much that's defining. I won't go into it too much, but it's because you said it very, very well, and I haven't narrowed this one down because they're so prevalent. But it's that imperative, the survival imperative, and actually, again, where you talked about utilitarianism, it's more than that. You could argue it's a version of communism in its pure ideological sense, not in the reality of how it actually worked. We're not all equal. In theory, in the original version of the Borg, the pre-Queen version, it is essentially a communist utopia. Everybody is equal.
In real-world, communism doesn't really work because of corruption, because of the human factor.
No, because we're not all equal. Simply not. And it is, and the reason that the Borg as a metaphor works so well as an exploration of that is what you have to give up to genuinely all be equal are things we hold too dear. Liberty, freedom, want versus need. The same reason that socialism, not even communism, is problematic is because most people aren't prepared to give up something they want necessarily to help the greater good. In the same way, it's the needs of the many versus the needs of the few. As you said, the one in your title, it is exactly that. And Borg are a perfect big idea because you can enjoy them just as a marauding evil alien technological race, but there's so much in there. At the other extreme, you've got sort of Kirk is almost an Ayn Randian individualist in some ways, especially because how he always violates regulations when it suits him, and does repeatedly do the reverse of the needs of the many. The Borg are a very, very potent exploration of free will and liberty, and how much the nature of our existence, our identity, is predicated on the I, and the ability to have agency over that. Which, to be honest, I think is always enough to make one shed a tear. No.
I would just say that if you want to know more about our thoughts on the Borg, then please go back and listen to our episode from season 1.
My number 3 is the Prime Directive.
Oh, yeah, good one. I was hoping somebody would bring that up.
What's that? Never heard of it.
Should a society be interfered with? Or when, if you say it should be? It is probably the franchise's biggest moral, philosophical wormhole, for lack of a better phrase. It sounds great, right? Hey, don't mess with less advanced civilizations. But in the moment, you may need it to survive. You may need it to help that civilization survive. Should that civilization survive if they can't figure it out themselves? Where do you draw the line on this? All of our captains experienced that.
And broke it.
And broke it to do what they thought was the right thing. There's no easy answer. There's questions as to whether that was right or wrong. It's among the best debates in all of Star Trek, is what makes it such a good device. How did I put it? It's not a solution, it's an argument. Just as examples, Dear Doctor has great examples of it. Tuvix, obviously. Pen Pals, Little Private War. The whole question of, is Spock right when he says the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, right?
Doesn't work for the Baku in Insurrection, does it?
Correct. And what is Picard's big line? Interference could lead to incalculable damage. And he's right. He's right. So I always thought that was, the Prime Directive was a very cool, like up there with the IDIC. The Star Trek explores in different ways. You got the ship boldly going, and then it gets you asking and answering questions as well, that internal exploration. And Prime Directive is the key example of that for me. I think Star Trek done right, which is why a lot of people, I believe, have issues with the J.J. Abrams movies, is that they didn't really, the ship went, but there was no exploring of anything there, and philosophically.
No big ideas.
No big ideas in any of it. So anyway, that's my number 3.
Yeah, I think that's really good. The Prime Directive is essentially so Roddenberry in many ways because it is an idealized version of the American experiment.
I'm going to agree with you there, but my number 1 builds on what you just said.
Okay. Toast.
Well, if I was to say that I titled my third spot, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? You probably know.
Hey guys, our time is up. It was great chatting. Ta-ra!
I mean, the prime example, you mentioned it, Measure of a Man from Next Generation. We've spoken about this episode a lot. It's not as good or stylish as Blade Runner, which covers many more existential questions, but Measure of a Man still captures the same core idea, and it's through one of my favorite Star Trek characters, Data. 2 examples of stuff that I've looked to explore in Ad Astra Per Aspera and Measure of a Man. I do it through the setting of a courtroom and trying to define something. But I haven't got much more to say about it.
Excellent, though. Well, it's interesting now. We're starting to overlap a lot more.
Right.
Which, given your fear, Tobes, good job. So, because my number 2, my title is Can Forever Truly Be Guarded?
What could this one be about?
Yes, it's exactly what Ian already talked about very, very well, and so I won't add very much, which is the cost of changing history. How all of these are like a Venn diagram. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. So McCoy wanted to save Edith Keeler, and if he had, everything as Alo goes. So there is, I think, actually an underlying big idea that seems to be underneath a lot of what we're talking about, interestingly, as we're talking about it in terms of that sense of what's good for everyone, what's actually morally, ethically good versus our individual experience.
My number 2 is the human condition and what does it mean to be human. Now, this is going to overlap, and honestly, it's a lot of what Toby just talked about. But what's your phrase, Rich? The secret sauce? I think it's the secret sauce of the whole franchise, really. You got Spock with emotion and logic. You've got Data trying everything he can to understand humanity and wanting to be human. You've got Seven reclaiming her humanity and individuality. Odo is so human, even though he's not.
We've got the EMH as well.
Right, EMH. You've got Worf even trying to tone down. Seriously, his time around humans changed him. No question. It goes on and on. Basically, it boils down to, story-wise, structure-wise, using outsider characters to reflect on humanity. What's good about us and what's bad about us.
They're not so alien after all, isn't it?
That's the whole point. And, it's empathy, friendship, sacrifice, regret, growth, curiosity. It's laughing, it's crying, it's the occasional tear from a Borgified captain. We have all mentioned several of the same things repeatedly, which is measure of a man, but I would also throw the offspring in there is a key example of this. One of my absolute favorite episodes of the show, and I think it sometimes falls on number 6 out of top 5 and 11 out of top 10 for people. And I would argue Star Trek Undiscovered Country is very strong on this scale. The 2 lines that I think represent this the best are, I have been and always shall be your friend. And another Spock line, actually, logic is the beginning of wisdom, not the end. 2 of my favorite lines in all of Star Trek. And they go right to what you were saying, Toby, in the previous point, and right to what you've been saying, Richard, in a couple of your choices.
My second spot I've called, and then they woke up. The big idea is obviously about memory.
Oh, I thought you were talking about your co-hosts.
So yeah, it's about memory and false memory and the impact that an experience where false memories are implanted into a person. What a surprise. Rich went the happy route. I went the dark route because I'm talking about Deep Space Nine's Hard Time. Obviously, this falls into the O'Brien must suffer bracket.
Yeah, sorry.
Picard's experience was essentially, at the end of it, a happy dream. O'Brien's not. O'Brien's was absolutely a nightmare, and it's one he can't dismiss. He can't just brush it off, even though he knows it wasn't real. Just like with Picard, it has a deep and lasting impact on him, and he's suffering from this fake post-traumatic stress, and he won't admit it to himself, specifically the guilt he feels from his actions, even though it was all fake and it was all created. He didn't do the thing, but it still feels very, very real to him. I think memory is just a genuinely fascinating subject for creative storytelling, and in particular, the manipulation of memory, the implanting of false memories, mind control, brainwashing, dream worlds. There are plenty of examples. The Matrix, Total Recall, the Ipcress file. It's a theme that I find very, very fascinating because, as we spoke about previously, about the remember line from The Wrath of Khan, my memory has tricked me into saying that wasn't in the film when I first saw it when I was a kid, but it was.
Is that a Mandela effect then?
Maybe, yeah. But I don't really have much more to say because you spoke about it. But you went the light and I went the shade. I could have gone in a light, but obviously I chose not to.
No. And it's interesting that wasn't even an adjustment. That was literally yeah. So my number 1 does follow on pretty much from Ian's last entry. So to illustrate it, the quote I would give is, "The human adventure is only just beginning." And it is the bettering ourselves and the aspirational idea that there is always, and whether that's through literal, physical, spatial, or metaphorical, existential aspiration to be better, it's the idea that is a core, essential part of who we are. And the example I would go with is the Star Trek The Motion Picture, which I try to top as many of our lists as I possibly can, which is V'Ger as a representation of that idea. So transcendence, what is necessary, and no matter how many things you accumulate, there's something more that's beyond us, that's beyond our comprehension, that is probably the ultimate aspiration and what that means. For me, I think any of these themes actually could have, these big ideas could have been shuffled, but this has always had to be top for me because the more we've done this podcast and the more often that I've come back to the motion picture for a variety of reasons.
Than the cells.
Well, ignoring, the sexual awakening aspect of it, is just the fact that genuinely for me, I think the more I've ruminated on it, the more seeing the motion picture when I was 5 or 6, I can't remember exactly, was literally a mind expanding moment. And when anyone says, Star Wars versus Star Trek, Star Wars, brilliant fun, lots of mythical archetypes, lots of interesting cultural ideologies permeated through, a grab bag of references and things from all over the clip, undeniably. But Star Trek broadened my mind, showed me a a concept, an idea that improves me. So I feel that the reason I wanted to do big ideas and the reason I always talk about it is I feel that I am better as a human on many levels because of Star Trek. Because it's humanism, it's positivism, its sense of aspiration, its sense of unity and infinite diversity and infinite combinations. Yes, it came from a flawed time, from a flawed man, but everything that he baked into it from the very beginning is encapsulated why big ideas are so important to Star Trek and why, for me, that's what makes it different from most other forms of intellectual property. It is intellectual property. And I think for me, that married with the emotion and the character and the storytelling makes it, to paraphrase Ian, who paraphrased me, the secret sauce of what makes Star Trek so great. And the motion picture was my first experience with it. I think it's one of the prime distillations of all of those things. Perfect cultural commodity for me.
How long did it take you to come up with that intellectual property line?
I made that up on the spot, mate.
It's good.
Well done, yeah.
Well played. All right, I am going with my number one, is very much in line with yours, Rich. Right down to I have the word better in my notes. We are not perfect, we are better.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about. We are not seeking in Star Trek to attain perfection. Humanity is seeking to be better. And that's the key thing. And my headline for this is hope and utopianism. People learned, people made mistakes, people grew, people still are. As much as I was disappointed ultimately in Starfleet Academy, I liked what it was shooting for. Let's give us these people early. Let's teach them what Starfleet can be about, what it is about, or what it tries to be about. It's not conquest, it's exploration. Knowledge is important. History is important. Diversity mattered. All of that. And here's Blade Runner again. Blade Runner is the dark version of Star Trek, if you think about it. You know, it says the future may break us, where Star Trek is saying, hey, we're going to bend, we're not going to break, and we are going to make ourselves better. And that optimism, especially now, I think that's why we ended up with so much Star Trek yet again in recent years, is because a lot of people want and need that. Again, execution is a whole different thing, but where we are with it is we needed this. You know, this is what the world kind of needed, and to get it from an entertainment franchise is really pretty cool.
You love quotes, Ian. You love quotes, and the one that's immediately popped into my mind you were saying that is, there are always possibilities.
There are always possibilities is on my list, and if you want to go on the other side of that, though, maybe we weren't meant for paradise, is a wildly important line.
We're on the other side of paradise.
Exactly. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Episodes that might tie into all of this more directly, or movies, is you've got Star Trek 4 again, you've got the motion picture, you've got Far Beyond the Stars as a very key example of it. The Neutral Zone is a terrific example of it. And then, you know, all the classics that we've named over our various shows and series and movies. The whole concept of the needs of the many, I always thought was just a beautiful Star Trekian utopian concept that came after Roddenberry. I mean, he was still with the franchise and he was still alive, but when I say after Roddenberry, I mean after the original series. It builds on the spirit of the original series.
Interpretation of an original source becomes as valid.
Right. The new source.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Tobes. Bring it home. Bring it home, Tobes.
Well, you've both gone very positive with your number ones. No, of course I haven't gone positive.
Hang on, say it with me. Say it with me, Rich. You heartless bastard.
I didn't get out to laugh.
This is actually how you interpret it, because I've entitled this "The Roads Less Trodden," and this is generally something that I find very, very interesting, and that's choice, and the outcomes of choice, and the consequence of choice, and some people put it down to fate, and I mean it's the sliding doors moment. I did think about the mirror universe as a dark reflection of our usual comfy Star Trek world. Mm-hmm. I also thought about actual literal splitting of personality and the original series, The Enemy Within. I probably should have gone with Next Generation's Tapestry as an example of choice with Junior Lieutenant Picard, but I actually decided to go with a later episode, which is Parallels from Next Generation. The conceit of why it happens is pretty flimsy. it's a science MacGuffin-y type thing. But I do love the exploration of the different lives that Worf might have led up to this point. Worf being the character that they choose is really interesting because he's usually very stoic, hardline. This is the direction that we should go in. He's decisive in that way. So to see other different ways that it goes is very interesting. I think I am with a lot of fans in that the Deanna-Worf relationship is not something that I particularly liked. I always wanted Deanna to end up with Riker, which eventually does happen. So I never really bought that relationship. But as a one-off story, to see that happen, I found that very interesting. And I particularly like at the end where they're trying to work out which one of the Enterprise Ds is Worf's actual one, and you see the Borg ravaged Enterprise with the bearded Riker attacking his colleagues, his friends. I often think about, if I'd done this, would my life have been different? And how would it have been different? And would I have been happy if it had gone this route, or would I have been sad? What if I got married and had kids? That still might happen, I guess, but Ian's shaking his head as if that's never going to happen.
No, I wasn't shaking it at that at all. No. No, I swear.
No, he's the heartless bastard.
I wasn't. No. People at home, ignore these morons. No.
You genuinely were shaking your head.
No. That was me. No, that was me thinking. I will tell you exactly what I was thinking. Just the other day, I was thinking about, to the minute, how things can change. Oh, I forgot my keys, and I went back into my house to get them. And as I was walking out the door, I said to myself, did I just cause a car accident or miss a car accident? And it's you just don't know where anything you do will take you. If it's not, I used to have a girlfriend who always used to say, if it's meant to be, it'll be. And I used to argue back, no, if it's meant to be, you make it what it will be.
Yeah, interesting.
And it's always this interesting philosophical argument. There's no right answer. There is no right answer. Or maybe there is and we just don't know it. But to your point, I totally agree with you, Toby. But no, I was not thinking that you won't get married one day.
Maybe I should put this in my second spot, and I'll just go with a positive one and match you guys.
No.
Wow, talk about messing with the timeline.
I invoke the Prime Directive.
I've made a choice.
Yes, stick with your choice.
Well, I believe that's the fatigue of entropy happening right here.
Oh,
hey, pull back.
Yeah. Well, there you go, folks. Those were our big ideas, themes, concepts, you'll never call them, that we all love and value from Star Trek. What were yours? Let us know. All the ways to contact.
Did Toby get it right? Did he understand the mission?
I think you excelled.
Give yourself credit, Toby. You were much better than you expected.
Yeah, indeed. So let us know. All the ways to contact us are in the description. And beyond that, we'll see you next time beyond the Final Frontier.
Peace, love, and logic, everybody.
It's a rabbit.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Final Frontier, a Star Trek podcast with Rich Matthews, Ian Spelling, and Toby Weidman. If you want to get in contact with us, you can email us on beyondffpod@gmail.com or check us out on social media. You can even join our Patreon at BFF Beyond the Final Frontier. Huge thanks go out to Alex Weidman for the brilliant original music. Please search Alex Weidman Composer on YouTube to hear the full fantastic theme and more. Also thanks goes to award-winning voiceover artist Cissy Jones for our excellent opening monologue. Find out more about her incredible work at cissyjones.com. And of course, last but not least, our brilliant artwork comes from the designer Russell Seal. Discover more of his work on behance.net/Russell Seal. Thanks again and see you next episode Beyond the Final Frontier.